Hello everyone. Hello everyone, and welcome to this audio podcast. This audio podcast as part of the Hyphenate. This audio podcast as part of the BRIX and Bash and Interlude. This audio podcast as part of the Squall and Crisis and Inspectorate. This audio podcast as part of a Storm Robotics production. Through this audio podcast, a sort of a follow up in on looking at aspects of industrial and environmental toxicology and looking at an environmental toxicological component referred to as or in amongst literature referred to as Diquat. In a previous audio podcast interlude, there was a sort of a look at a an, env- an environmental toxicological component referred to as Paraquat, and so in this audio podcast, sort of a look into another into another and somewhat similar um, a somewhat similar similar environmental herbicide. So a little bit in around Diquat then. So Diquat is also a pyridyl herbicide, much like Paraquat, and um, uh, uh, generally derived from a dibromide salt, or a dichloride monohydrate. And Diquat poisoning is less common than Paraquat poisoning. Human reports and experimental data have informed previously, retrospectively, that there's that there is that there's less extensive poisoning than that of and from Paraquat. Systemically, it can be in literature, it is has been evidence as where that Diquat has been absorbed, but is not selectively concentrated in lung tissue as poisoning, and uh, 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 um, additionally, Diquat has severe toxic effects on the central nervous system that are not typical of Paraquat poisoning. And whilst laboratory investigations or experimentation have suggested that Diquat is not directly neurotoxic, there have been relatively consistent pathological central nervous system changes noted in reported fatal cases of Diquat poisoning. So, in around some signs and symptoms, some of the signs and symptoms in amongst the in as part of the evidence, is when Diquat is poorly absorbed from the gastrointestinal tract following ingestion. In many human Diquat poisoning cases, clinical signs of neurological toxicity are the most pertinent. These include, for example, nervousness, irritability, fatigue, disorientation, nonsensical statements, inability to inability to inability to where there have been cases where there's an inability to recognize 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 in around for example in around those person who those who an individual would have normally known, for example, and also a diminished reflexes. Early symptoms from Diquat poisoning are similar to that of Paraquat, reflecting its corrosive effects on tissues. Intestinal ileus with pooling of fluid in the gut, for example, has been characterized by several human in several cases of human, whether it's human poisonings by in around this in around in around some pathophysiological aspects. Additionally, there have been cases where there's sort of renal renal damage is where renal damage where it can be significant, where it's been evidence as being significant with Diquat, as a as in cases of Paraquat poisoning. Therefore, it's an important feature of toxicity, um, and uh, the the symptomologies of Diquat poisoning can result in chronic renal failure, chronic kidney disease, where evidence in amongst the literature has informed that um, as, additionally, where in amongst the literature evidence has informed in around the symptomology of azotemia, and in around the sort of the environmental aspects, more particularly, Diquat is rapidly absorbed by clay constituents of soil, in the sort of sorbed state, which is resistant to biodegradation and photodegradation. The duration of residual activity in soil is a few days, and the deactivation resulting from its binding to soil. Dichloride is also removed rapidly from aquatic systems, principally by absorption. And if absorption is initially initi- is if absorption is initially too too if absorption is evidence in around environs biodegradation to soluble or volatile products occurs in several weeks. When sorbed to sediment, little or no degradation occurs. In any case, the dichromate disappears from water in amongst the environment within in between 2 to 4 weeks. Dichromate will photo degrade in surface layers of water in 1 to 3 or more weeks when not absorbed to particular matter. Dibromide ranges from moderately toxic to practically non-toxic to birds, depending on the species. It is slightly toxic to fish, and is not toxic to honeybees. Cows are particularly sensitive to the toxic effects of this toxic effects of diquat. Specifically around the toxicology, the central nervous system is affected mostly with diquat poisoning. These again consist of central nervous system sort of stem infarction, and particularly the that part of the central nervous system referred to as the pons. It's not clear whether whether post mortem changes toxically, sorry that the changes are like are as part of sort of secondary effects or secondary effects or sort of direct toxicology. However, related to however related irrespective where there are where in around the toxicology there is or can be systemic illness. There is probably a significant absorption of diquat across abraded or ulcerated ulcerated areas on those on where diquat poisoning has occurred in around the sort of analytical methods. Literature informs a diquat in water may be determined by passing a large sample directly through a cation exchange column, followed by washing and elution steps and spectroscopic measurement. Additionally, chlorine dioxide acts extremely rapidly and within a few minutes to oxidize diquat. And additionally, the use of clay absorbents, for example, in amongst literature, and bentonite or activated carbon, followed by chemical coagulation, also appears to be effective for the rapid removal of diquat from water. That draws this audio podcast to a close. This audio podcast is part of the hyphenate. This audio podcast is part of the BRIX and Bash and Interlude. This audio podcast is part of a Squalene Crisis and Inspectorate, and this audio podcast as part of a Storm Robotics production.